Welcome to another edition of Bringing the Closers. No, Ben and I did not get a divorce. Yes, we did have couples counseling, and we're back. And so it's good to be back. Ben, how's it going, sir?
Going well. You might notice that I'm in some new digs today. This is the new place in Midland here. I'm getting settled. Been here for about a week. It's nice and like 30-degree outside, so I'm like taking advantage of the 1 week of winter out here.
This is your
You
fourth,
seem to be
fifth.
counting something. I
I'm
don't
trying to
know.
count how many mansions you have now. Like you just bought a new mansion. It's pretty cool. I'm just chilling here, my nice lounge chair.
I mean, as I said before we were on air, I mean, I think that this place could probably fit in like one of your closets, and so I mean, it all kind of depends on perspective, I suppose.
Okay. I'm not going to dispute that, so that's fine. Well, we took off. God, it's been a couple of weeks. I don't know how long it's been since we recorded a show. You were moving while I was out of town. I was in Nicaragua. You were moving. Felt like and then I was at the Bush China deal. So it's been 2 weeks since we recorded, hasn't it?
It has been, yeah. I missed it.
Yeah. And then I'll be off next week. I'll be in China, and then we'll be back the week of Thanksgiving. Just a couple of programming notes there. We do have a guest on today. In the meantime, Ben, what are we going to talk about? I have a slight idea. You were at a conference last week with a lot of high-level executives at Midland. We hadn't got to talk off very much about it. I am curious, going to an event like that with a lot of people who, were CEOs and executive types, a lot of wheeler and dealer types in the room. Did you glean anything from being in a crowd with a lot of high-powered individuals? Was there some takeaways? Was there some things where you go, you know what? I like the way that this guy or gal presented themselves or presented the information. Was there anything that you gleaned from that conference that would be useful for folks who didn't get to attend that or trying to aspire to reach those kind of heights?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in a kind of a roundabout way. I was actually having breakfast with a guy this morning that was at the conference as well. He's been in the midstream and water transfer space for years now, and as we've talked about on the podcast, I've made that shift in my business just over the last 9 to 12 months, and so I'm relatively new, still drinking from a fire hose. But at the same time, I feel like being out in Midland as much as I am, even though I'm just recently a full-time resident, again. I've got a pretty good finger on the pulse. And so, one of the things that we were talking about this morning is that it's amazing to me how a lot of the conferences and a lot of the talks are almost drawn up with like a blind eye to the fact that people that are in that room, that are industry professionals that have a full pulse in the market, are going to be able to call BS on a lot of things that are being talked about and being presented in these presentations. And I don't say that necessarily as a complete negative, but it's interesting to me that those presentations don't take a more realistic approach to, okay, the people in this room probably all talk together on a daily basis. And so I need to make sure that I'm actually, bringing value in my talk and talking about something that is not, mundane or routine or just second nature to these people. Because one of the things, the reason I say this, because one of the other things that I was thinking about at this conference specifically, so this was mostly executive level people at this water forum. There were probably a couple 300 people in the room. So I mean, it was well attended. I was definitely, I would imagine, just because of my scope of experience in this space, I was probably one of the least experienced people in the room in terms of knowledge base on full stack, how this industry works. But at the same time, I listened to about 6 hours of talks, and I didn't come away with very much. Oh, that was new, or that's interesting. And so if I'm taking that away, I can only imagine what the 20-year vet is sitting there thinking. And also, kind of dovetailing off of that, I thought that there's a lot of, especially in this conference, but I think it's kind of rampant across a lot of these, is that it's the same talk that was given 18 months ago, or one of the talks, and not to call them out, actually I won't name who it was, but one of the private equity firms, one of the banking groups went up and gave a talk, and of course they're going to talk about how they expect to see $75 oil next year, and how they're expecting to see an upward tick in the market, because I mean they're not paid to stand up there and give you the base case or the negative case, right? And so it kind of, I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot offline, but it's almost like you go there for the networking, and you go there for like having been in the room more than the value of the actual talks, which is totally, I would imagine, is totally counterintuitive to the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Yeah, I don't know. And again, I know that a lot of that was pessimistic. I mean, I think they are valuable for the networking, but in terms of the content-driven stuff, I kind of find it to be lacking a lot of times.
No, I agree, and that's why I was curious about this one. I've seen this one and have thought about going several different times, but never have made it. And the main reason is that conferences that are heavy lecture based, I have found historically to be, and I've given some of these myself, so I'm guilty as charged. But to be not really much beyond what a surface level synopsis would be. And one of the things I would encourage folks to consider is a couple things. Part of the problem is when you're publicly traded, obviously you have to be concerned about, shareholders getting wind of you saying something and then your stock price being impacted or some kind of crazy SEC violation or whatever the case may be. But counter to that, I would say that Elon Musk, I've been critical of him multiple times in the past. However, one of the things he does well is that he has the personality that makes people believe in what he's doing, despite the diminishing returns their investment might give them, which has, for some reason, kept their stock, pretty inflated, in my opinion. And maybe he'll turn the corner because of that. And so I think there is danger in these CEOs of publicly traded companies going out and saying the wrong thing. But I think they also miss that people resonate with people, and that people that listen to the show regularly are people who like the things that we say, people who turn it on and turn it off, or people who don't like the things that we say. But you can actually grow a loyal group of people in the industry who want you to succeed, who want to hear what you have to say, by being a little bit more off the cuff, a little bit more down to earth, and not trying to water everything down to where everyone in the room's like, yeah, okay, we heard that before. And I think that's kind of a frustration that's why I don't attend a lot of those type of events, because there's not that value, and we really want to hear what you really think. And I understand the fear, and you have an obligation to stockholders. It feels like there should be a way to for these companies to remedy that. As social media, we think about social media impact now, but it's probably very early on the impact of what will happen compared to what will be 5-10 years from now. Companies are going to have to figure out ways to get their message out there in the social media world. And what you don't want then is, what you don't want to be is a CEO who's giving these watered down speeches, these watered down quarterly calls, and then caught on a cell phone at some business meeting saying something contradictory or completely more maybe using hyperbole, but completely shifts the narrative. And so I think CEOs are in an interesting time period where 20 years ago they come out to quarterly calls, they could get the Wall Street Journal, they could control the interviews. And now you're starting to see that trend to shift. And I wonder how, especially folks in our industry, will take that and figure out how to use it to their advantage. And the ones that do, much like Aubrey McClendon, had a very much I don't want to use this as a negative term, but a cult-like following. He's a very renowned figure in oil and gas, despite the fact he made a lot of blunders. He had a lot of things, but people resonated with his personality because the way he handled things, people I like the way that he does that. And so I'm curious if we'll see that trend in oil and gas with the publicly traded companies as we move forward.
No, I mean, to your point, I mean, yeah, you don't really, at those talks, I don't think you ever really get to see the personable side of those. They're just very sterilized, just kind of boilerplate. And I mean, one of the other things that I was thinking about, and I kind of mentioned earlier, but so if you're talking about one of the, let's use this conference specifically. So, one of the larger water transfer firms in the Permian gets up there, and their head of business development is giving a talk on, their 2018 performance, 2019 performance, and 2020 projection. It's likely that there's a few dozen people in that room that are probably current clients. And
Right.
so if you're talking about things that are not backed up by fact, you're going to get called out, whether verbally or not. But number two, if you're talking about like very generic, just kind of broad strokes, and you have some, for lack of a better phraseology, some bad takeaways and some bad market dynamic takeaways, whatever you want to call it, you're maybe at risk of losing customers. Because I mean, if I'm sitting there and I'm a customer of somebody that is very has a lot of competitors in the space, and their guy is standing up there just espousing falsehoods, that's going to register with me, right? And so I think you kind of got to walk the line. And I mean, this industry, I think more than most, when you're talking about oil and gas, especially when you're talking about out here in the Permian, I mean, everybody knows everybody's business to a certain degree. And so there's only like a little bit you can get away with. And I think that I see that more in the water and midstream and infrastructure space than I do in minerals, because minerals seems to be a lot more vast, and there are a lot more players there. And do you see the same thing, or?
That's interesting. I haven't thought about it in those terms, so you're kind of catching me off the cuff here. And it's space. So I'm more familiar with the space that you were at, and you're more familiar with the space that you're referring to. So it is interesting, and I'd have to chew on that before I gave you an appropriate answer. But I think you definitely might be onto something there. One of the things that when I was in Nicaragua this past week that stood out to me was, obviously I speak very, very, very little Spanish. Enough that if I were in a lost in a village, I could say a handful of words and probably get potentially what I needed. But that would be like, how do I get out of here? Or where's the hospital? Very, very small stuff. So I was depending on translators all week. And one of the things that you learn when you speak through a translator is if you become aware, and I say aware in this sense, is that you become aware how much slang you use, or colloquialisms or metaphors or whatever, and those don't translate. And one of the things that I try to do when I'm speaking through a translator is make sure that I use my oh gosh, what's the term for this? My facial expressions, my hands. I'll monitor the pitch of my tone a lot more, so that while the information is being translated from me to the person receiving it, the person hearing my tone, while they don't know what I'm saying, they can infer from my tone the type of message that I'm trying to get across. Now, if I'm talking to you, or if I'm talking to Nate or someone else, I might raise a voice or whatever, or be loud. I'm kind of a loud guy anyways, but I'm not nearly as aware of that. And I thought about that from some of the things we talked about in the past. Is that it kind of dawned on me this past week, is that there's a lot of times where I'm probably not as careful in my messaging, because I presume the person I'm speaking to, because they speak English, will understand what I'm saying, and that can cause confusion. And so it was just kind of a reminder for me this week, because I was on the other end. I was in a impoverished nation and not executives, but I had to communicate. And I had to communicate through someone else to get my message across. And so it was just a good reminder that, for people who are wanting to put together deals, or wanting to be successful in business or sales, that don't take for granted that the message that you are espousing is going to be received the way that you are. Make sure that you are careful with your terms. And it was a good reminder, because I haven't thought about that at that level in a while, because I haven't had to talk to a translator. Does that kind of, do you see where I'm getting that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there have been times where, I mean, you and I talk on a daily basis, and there have been times, recently, that you and I had to kind of take a step back and reframe, some of the things that we were talking about, because it wasn't being conveyed the right way, and it wasn't being received the right way. And so, I mean, yeah, I think that's, I mean, I think no matter what relationship you have, parent, child, spouse, business owner, client, I mean, pick a dynamic. That's an ever changing dynamic. And that's something that you need to be cognizant of, because, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, it sounds cliche, but a lot of times it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it, that's really going to get the point across. And that's what the person's going to be left with. And so if you can, if you take the forethought to frame what you're saying and really think through it, as opposed to just, take it for granted that the person's going to understand where you're coming from, I think that can solve a lot of problems on the front end.
So if we bring this full circle then, and we say, okay, you have the high-level executives who are kind of speaking a watered-down message to a room full of people who actually want to care. I mean, actually want to hear what they have to say. They really are. They're there. They're paying money to hear these people speak. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are trying to communicate through a translator, and they want to hear what you have to say just as much, for different reasons, but they want to hear what you have to say just as much. The takeaway might be is that what I was alluding to a minute ago is, if you can get your message across to the right audience, if you're in the right audience, you do show you care, and you figure out the way where you're taking care of your shareholders or your clients or whatever. You're not throwing them under the bus, you're coming under the bus. You can probably be more successful than these conferences where, if we're being honest about our industry right now, there's a lot of bad press. And we don't have those dynamic CEOs who are out there that generate goodwill from the public, generally speaking. And so, I would submit to you, Ben, that for the folks who listen to this show and are looking to do stuff in the industry, being aware of that and seeing what you saw, re- remember how that feels when you go to something and you're let down in the message, and not being let down because you tried your best and it just didn't work, but being let down because the person didn't give you what you wanted, and y'all both knew that there was not the effort or the intent to do it there. Because trying to convey the message, the other day you mentioned a conversation where we kind of had to stop and reset. It was both, I think, clear in one of those where we were both trying to say something, but for whatever reason it wasn't communicated. So it was easy to stop and then restart that conversation, because we both could feel there was a passion, or whatever you say, to resolve the issue, and that was being communicated because we were being okay. Well, this, and so. I think if you take those two extremes and you look at it and say, well, if you're trying to be successful in sales or business leadership or whatever, being careful in how you communicate, and also talk to the audience, whoever that might be, whether it's one person or a group of people, in a manner that they at least appreciate that you are coming across as this message is important and you're trying to do your best to communicate. That doesn't mean you'll always succeed, but at least the audience will respect that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I know we only have a couple minutes before we're going to have the guest join on. So I wanted to kind of take what you're saying and apply it to something actually specific that that happened at the conference. So one of the sessions was a round table. There were some industry guys up there, that run midstream groups, and one of the guys was talking about this concept that there really is right now no efficient way for a water transfer company, and I'm talking about a company that is utilizing pipeline and trucks to offload and onload water onto into an SWD or what have you. There's no efficient way at current for those capacities always to be at 100%, because there's going to be a frac over here. You're going to need 300,000 barrels of water this week, but then you're not going to then you're going to go down to 60,000 barrels, and so you have that dynamic. But then also you don't have the water transfer companies talking to each other to say, okay, I need this much this week,
Right.
and then for the next 3 weeks I'm going to be offloading this, and so rather than finding like an equilibrium and being able to trade information to the point to be able to have a much more efficient system, every operator is very close to the vest and only does what they can control. And so that I was talking to a group last week, and this I certainly wouldn't be able to name the company, but because it's not for public knowledge at all. But I mean, the company was telling me that when they are over 40% utilized on their pipeline for water, that to them is at full capacity.
Wow.
Which to me, I mean, so you're baked into your model of your pro forma for your business. You're baking in that 60% underutilization is maxed out. And and when I look at something like that, I'm sure there's a number, and this was one of the bigger firms out there. This wasn't a mom and pop, small potatoes. I mean, this was a firm that if they, if there's an asset, that they want to take down, they have the capital to do so, etc. But it just kind of was indicative to me of just the lack of actual transparency. And then, so when you take that back to what we were talking about before, I think there needs to be some level of interest in having that transparency and developing that relationship and that trust before you actually get to the step of like, okay, let's make sure that we hear each other correctly. Does that make sense? So I think that's almost like step 2 in the process. Whereas if you don't have the mutual desire to even get to that space, like you're kind of left hanging.
One of the things I had about a year, maybe 2 years ago, I had an idea I was going to float out there and put it in a blog or something. I never did, but get your take on this. It ties in that 40% utilization. One of the things that I thought that the industry should consider adopting for more of the services than it currently does is commitment to vendors over the course of the year. So they come in and say, vendor A, this is what you do. We want, X percentage of your staff, and we will pay them whatever the normal is, 40 hours, 60 hours, whatever it is, from January 1 to December 31st. If we don't, there's a buyout clause, whatever. But we want that to ensure that we have these resources on staff. And if you do not devote those resources and you start using them for our competitor, then guess what? We'll fine you or whatever. I think those conversations, because part of what you're talking about, the 40%, if I had to guess, is they're afraid that they're going to get in a bind and they can't, depend on a vendor to get them what they need. And so they kind of keep this uptick instead of sitting down. And I don't know enough about this case, so it's hard for me to speak into that. But instead of sitting down with the vendor and say, okay, you know what, we have 100 projects we're going to do this year. We're going to devote resources from your company to maintain 5 or 10, whatever it is. So, and that's X amount of dollars roughly, give or take, because T&M, stuff like that. So we're going to guarantee this. And then beyond that, we want partial staffing for another 5 or 10 of the projects. So now we have 10 projects locked up and partial staffing for the next 10. So 20 projects are not complete, but we have a good framework here. From someone who's in the vendor business, that's very helpful for me because you want to keep the client happy. But if the client, if you're doing good work for the client, but you, on the flip side, you don't know if the client's gonna give you more work or when that work's coming or how it's coming, it makes it very hard for you to schedule. And what happens, Ben, is Ben's pipeline company is depending on R Square Global to do something. And Ben, because he doesn't have, Ben's a project manager, he doesn't have the information on what's next for him. I'm like, hey, Ben, what's going on? Well, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. I'm like, well, okay, well, Nate's company over here is actually going to employ us to go do stuff. And Nate's a direct competitor to Ben. So then we go work for Nate while we're waiting on Ben. And then 3 weeks later, Ben calls back. And so now you start straining resources. And then Ben might have had our A team because he was a good client, but he loses the A team because he couldn't keep us busy. And then we go to Nate. And it wasn't that he couldn't keep us busy. It's just there was a small lag. He had a 3-4 week lag and he couldn't promise us work. So at the end of the day, if time is money, and it is in this business, would it have been more beneficial for Ben to lock us up for those 4 weeks, at least partial time or full time or whatever it is, instead of losing those resources to a competitor, and then now the competitor has the theoretical A team or whatever it is, and they're getting the best benefit. And I think those type of things, I don't know what the actual answer lies in, but I think those transparencies, those issues you're talking about, they kind of tap into the core to some of the flaws that we see in the industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think you're absolutely right, but I think it's even more granular and maybe even worse when you're talking about like real-time capacity issues
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're drilling a well, you're going to be producing water, right? You know you have water coming out of the ground. You got to do something with it. It can't just sit there. And so it's not as though so if you have a drilling schedule, you should have some semblance of what water needs you're going to have for those things. But what ends up happening is the rig gets out on location, and then they're like, oh crap, we have to figure out what to do with the water that's going to be coming out of the ground in 36 hours, as opposed to here's our quarterly projection. We're going to be looking at producing these amounts of water in these weeks. In these off weeks, we should try to get it from over here, or in these major peak weeks, maybe we need to offload some over here. Like it seems as though, and so coming full circle, one of the other things that I think this is a little bit higher level than what we're talking about, but I think something else to consider is, so let's say that you're an operator X, and you have a midstream company that's a bolt-on, that's an ancillary to you, and the CEO of the exploration company goes to the water team and says, okay, how much money do you need for next year to do what you need to do? Here's our drilling schedule. Give me a number. And the guy says, okay, the head of the midstream company says, okay, we need $75 million. Okay, so the operator gives $75 million, and they, that's enough for the water commitments for that year. Now that turns into, I mean, the midstream manager no longer has an incentive to return an ROI on that money. It's just, okay, I now have a budget of $75 million to spend, as opposed to if that number was, okay, I'm going to give it to you on a draw basis as needed, and your mandate is to actually return on investment on this money, as opposed to just what do you need to fund the project. Like you're completely changing the metric. And I know I'm changing the conversation.
No,
and I think
no. I mean,
but those are the kind of the shifts that you're talking about when you actually talk about on the ground.
Yeah, and no, I think you're right. It's a multi-level problem. I will say that I know from talking to people in the industry, I'm sure you hear this as well, is that, I'm going to sell to this manager in this department. They're incentivized by X, but they also need the buy-in from someone else from some other department, and they're incentivized by Y. And well, what I'm trying to pitch to them actually would help both of them out, but because, we're trying to sell it to X, really, is who we understand, that we don't really understand how to connect with Y. And so internally, there's no way to rationalize that, because Y's motivation isn't the same as X. And so you have competing interest, when in reality, these publicly traded companies' interests should be aligned. And so, I don't know if we have any CEOs of publicly traded companies, but I would say it is a common complaint in the industry that people are siloed, and they don't understand what's going on, and it's hard to communicate across these platforms. And so I think that's one thing that we as an industry hopefully will do better. But anyways, with that being said, we do have on a guest, so we will stop right here. And up next, we have on Todd Schweber, who is a partner at Apex Strategy. Todd, it's good to have you on today. How are you doing, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay, first off, you are based on the East Coast over there in Richmond, Virginia, it looks like. But let's talk a little bit about who you are, kind of a 30,000-foot view of your background. You have in your LinkedIn profile, which we'll link to in the show notes, that you help with acquisitions, sales, and investment platforms, and attract and close high-value clients and deals through technology. Perfect for this show, but kind of break that down, who you are, what your company does, and what your background is for the listeners.
Yeah, quick background. Started off kind of in the finance world. Did the Wall Street Shuffle right out of college, WVU, Mountaineers. After a few hardcore years in New York, I transitioned out to Colorado. Still in the finance world, but focused on capital markets and really started getting my hands dirty into the startup space out there. Which brought me back to the East Coast with a company called Living Social right around the time that we took on about $250 million from Amazon and Bezos and family, and really kind of pushed me forward into the love of emerging companies, disruptive platforms, if you will. So I stayed very close to the emerging startup, pre-rev, pre-funded companies and businesses from coast to coast, and with one foot in the capital markets as much as possible. That brought me to Wealth Forge, where my marketing and branding background was used to help scale a private placement security transaction platform for a broker dealer, Wealth Forge Securities, who is breaking the mold, so to say, as far as online security transactions. And from there, I found a niche through a couple of buddies back in West Virginia, John Perry specifically, who was putting together an oil and gas property rights platform. Needed to put a couple of dollars together to get started, and so he gave me a call. We put some money together and started buying, selling, leasing, acquiring, divesting, trading property rights, all through the empowerment of technology and I would say online strategies and processes that nobody else was really using. Kind of brought with me through my experiences in the digital world. Long-winded, but I think that gives you kind of an idea of where I'm coming from, where I'm at right now.
Okay, great. I do want to talk about the technologies, if we can. I want to follow up on one of the things Ben and I were just talking about before you hopped on. And we talked about this a few times on the show about messaging, conveying message, you know, how hard that is to do sometimes, and, you know, some of the ways that you can do it in a manner that ensures that you get your message across. You've kind of had your hands with a lot of different people, some high-ticket folks, as well as folks on the ground. When you go into something and you're trying to convey a message, or we're talking about your technology and kind of the message it conveys as well, but how do you make sure that you frame things in a manner that's helpful for the audience? Do you customize your pitch to the personnel? Do you kind of have a broad thing and then, you know, bounce it, kind of move it around depending on how they respond? How do you set it up so that you ensure that folks are understanding and comprehending what it is that you're trying to offer when you're putting together a deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to knowing your audience, right? Knowing your market. It's really tough to frame anything if you don't have a very intimate understanding of who it is you're trying to communicate with. One of the most I think simple ways to get to know that market or that audience or whoever the other person is that you're trying to get is by asking questions. I'm a big fan of asking to really uncover in a lot of cases, needs or desires, wants, etc., prior to ever going on a mass basis anyway, to communication. So that's one of the things that we have a challenge with a lot of our clients in Apex, where we're powering a lot of the top of the funnel activity as far as strategy, process, and systems, but messaging is still something I think has to come from inside the walls of the respective company and business, right? We work with groups that are in healthcare, oil and gas, real estate. Each one of those groups has its own insight, right? That they know that space, they know their market, they know their audience better than anybody else. So that messaging and that framework really needs to come from within. We can help by asking and giving them the tools to go out and find out more details from their clients or from their prospective clients. But the messaging really comes from deep down inside of the organization.
So Todd, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and take advantage of the fact that your experience is predominantly out of Marcellus and Utica, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio area, and a lot of the listeners are certainly more West Texas focused and out here out in Midland or the surrounding area. So I'm curious, can you give us just like maybe a 30-second elevator speech or kind of aerial view what you're seeing in the market these days in terms of mineral rights, and maybe how this market is as it compared to what it was maybe 18 months ago, and then also give us a synopsis on kind of what you're seeing in the natural gas markets as we're moving into 2020. Kind of give us a market overview, if you would.
Yeah, so I have a unique stance, specifically in the App Basin. As you know, we have Relic Energy Management, and then I also have Hoglich Aggregate, and so Relic Energy Management, super upstream and dealing with minerals, property rights, trying to be before the bit, if you will. And we'll start there. A lot of private equity money, private equity money has really kind of, I don't want to say dried up, but has become so very conservative in their parameters and their mandates that, any type of middlemen or intermediary focus or positioned groups out there have really had to focus on quality over quantity, right? So 18 months ago, running a very intensive inbound strategy, shotgun approach marketing was killing it. Fast forward to today, if you don't have a sniper rifle and you can't hit a target from 5 miles out, it's going to be tough to put a deal together, market it, and get any type of margin worth your time and effort. So that's one of the things I've really noticed. As far as the operators are concerned, leasing is almost non-existent at this point. I think there's a lot of baseball card trading taking place, and even that slowed down from last year, where operators were trading bits and pieces of acreage just to bolt on to their primary positions. But like I said, even that seems to have slowed down almost to a halt. One of the unique, I guess, insights I have from being a part of Hoglich Aggregates, which is kind of centralized when you look at the map of the App Basin. It's north central West Virginia, Marion County, and really where a lot of 50-mile radius, where a lot of exploration and activity, pipeline build out, etc., has taken place or was set to take place. And even that you're seeing come to a very abrupt slowdown, almost halt, where the oil and gas companies aren't exploring, So we thought, well, there's still production. There's still going to be, and even that started slowing down. You start to hear rumors a few months ahead of time, and then, based on the aggregate business model, where we're kind of focused on that midstream almost a little bit more than anything else. I mean, we certainly provide aggregate to well build out, et cetera, but our big market is the pipeline, slip repair, pipeline build out, et cetera. And that's a scary place to be right now. A lot of the pipelines have been kind of delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. And it's a pretty expensive space to keep delaying, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So I think over the next 12, 24 months, really, hopefully you see the market. You'll see the market condense. It's already condensing, but you'll start to see the market become even more efficient from top to bottom. And that starts even with the land groups out there that, I've never seen so much waste, guys. And I'm coming from the financial world, capital markets, et cetera, where there was just very little efficiency, very opaque. There was no transparency. And that's really, the best I can equate the land management side of the business to is just, absolutely really wasteful in more ways than one.
Yeah,
very. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, to that point, I think right before you got on, Ryan and I were talking about the fact that, I think one of the overarching themes that we're seeing across the market is this, this shift between, okay, here's our CapEx for the year, and our model is to produce as much oil or gas as we possibly can, to, okay, let's actually talk about getting an ROI for our business and an ROI for our economies of scale, as opposed to just racing to to produce as much as possible, kind of irrespective of the back end. And I think that's kind of what
isn't that a novel idea, though? It's like it kind of gave me because I saw it in the startup world, which when I say startup, it kind of gives me shivers. I hate the word startup because in my mind, I always you found these startups, quote unquote startups, who really didn't have a model for anything. Maybe they had a really great management team who had raised money before, or, had done something great in their previous life. And, they kind of had a name and people were willing to give them money, but they just kind of went through that cash and never really had, a real business plan in mind, like bringing in money, right? like creating revenue and value, It was all like, let's burn as much as possible. And I get the model, right? And scale and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, I think Wall Street, the lenders, the institutions, investors in general, are tired of that game, especially in the energy space. I think you had a lot of great, brilliant minds out there with wonderful management teams who put together wonderful pitches and showed fairy tale growth and yada yada, but never really were able to execute. And that to me is pretty important.
One of the things I'm curious from where you're at in the space is you talk about waste and stuff. How much do you think that is? There's a lot of narratives about why the oil and gas industry does what it does, and I think some of them are true, and some of them aren't necessarily are a little bit further from the truth. And so one narrative is, well, we got to be safe. Everything's got to be safe, and so you start changing things. People's lives could be in danger, and I think when you're talking about technology coming in, people dying, obviously, okay, I get that one. There's also this talk around, hey, the old guard, the older folks, they don't like technology, and so they like doing stuff the way they are. I think there might be something to that as well. But I've often wondered how much are the inefficiencies because there's a pride in the fact that people like doing things the way they like them done. And it's really, what, we've done it this way for 20 years and I like it that way. And I don't know if it's change is scary, more of there's a pride in what they've done. And now we're seeing, because we can, there's so many vendors now, the industry has exploded so much over the past 15 years that you get a lot of perspectives, and all of a sudden these inefficiencies are glaring because people like me and you and Ben, we work for multiple different companies, and so we can see when a company does something really well versus a company does something very poor, because we can compare and contrast because we're on the outside looking in. How much do you think that kind of contributes to what we see in the industry when we talk about inefficiencies?
Look, I think if you're not growing your business, if you're not improving in efficiencies, if you're not thinking about your shareholders or your investors, I think you're dead, and you may not even know it, right? I mean, I just that old adage, hey, we do it this way because this is the way it's always been done. I mean, how many times have we just seen companies fade away and die because that was their model? I mean, we see, like I said, not to continuously compare this space and what we're going through right now with the financial markets, but it's the same. It's the same thing I've seen in the financial world as the real estate world. And in my mind, you're always too early until you're too late, right? So there's a lot of groups, there's a lot of forward thinkers, thought leaders out there that the old guard is saying they're crazy, or we're not going to work with them because of X, Y, and Z, and they don't get it. And, this is a handshake type of an industry. And, we need to be belly to belly. And I think that the natural progression here is that the old guard at some point is going to die out. And that may piss a lot of people off, but it's what happens. And you got to look at who's going to be sitting in their seats next gen, right? There's not too many next gen guys come in that don't know how to operate, through systems and technology, or expect that there's data at a click of a button for them to work off of. And I think that the market's going to force these companies to get in line.
On your point about the financial stuff, one of the things that's fascinated me was Robinhood. They came out a couple years ago with basically unlimited trades are free, and then just the past few weeks ago, we see Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade. They're all getting rid of the trading fees, and they're moving to that model. And it felt like those institutions were hoping that Robinhood wouldn't be sustainable. And we can talk about what they do with their money and all that a separate time. But there's a sense in which it felt like the bigger institutions were almost resistant to this idea, and now all of a sudden they're like, hey, you can buy fractional shares, and we're not going to charge you for trading fees. And to me, that's a sign that I don't know if Robinhood will be sustainable long term, but there's a growing fear amongst those institutions that if they don't make a shift now, that they will begin to lose market share to an app on your phone called Robinhood. And so I think would you agree that those are the type of trends that almost have to happen where this kind of idea is like, I don't know if this is going to work, and all of a sudden you start to see everyone now has to adopt it because they're afraid of losing market share?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think market share is in the back of everybody's mind, especially when there's disruptive models and technology that come about. I think that, for the most part, in any industry, okay, this is what you're going to find in any industry. You're going to start seeing kind of this intermediation where there's less and less middlemen working, whether you're a Charles Schwab platform or a broker on the stock exchange or a broker out in the App Basin buying and selling or flipping acreage, or somebody raising capital for a fee. Those margins are going to continue to get smaller and smaller, and you're going to see a shift in these industries, as you already have, real estate, finance, and the energy industry right now. You're going to start seeing a shift from those guys who are in the middle, men and women in the middle, to start catering towards one side of the fence or the other. They're either going to start going towards and servicing the private equity or the operators specifically, and working with them on their side of the table, or they're going to jump over and kind of side with the product and the owners, the property owners, and the deal or the asset owners, right? And they'll provide services, right? I think managed services is really where everything's going. Managed services, to me, there's all this technology and all these new platforms and systems out there, but there's very limited resources in-house at any energy company, which is probably why the rate of adoption has been so low, because there's a fear, right? There's an education, there's a learning curve, there's a fear of, hey, where's my data going? Every oil and gas company out there thinks that their database is just, it's proprietary, and it's their secret sauce, so they're very hesitant to signing up to a third party application, CRM, title tracking, whatever it is, because they feel like their data is at risk. right? But you're going to start seeing that the managed services space is going to be a really, really big industry to help these organizations, big or small, manage the efficiency that comes with systems, strategy, processes.
So, Todd, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. So, circling back to something we mentioned a few minutes ago, where we were talking about, essentially at a high level, you either evolve or die. Coming at that from the reverse angle, I think all three of us, if we thought about it, I mean, at least I have a litany of examples that I could point to that, a firm executed one thing or another extremely well, and then they decided to diversify their offering and do things that they really didn't have an expertise in, and that turned out to kind of be the downfall or the thing that, that they took on too broad of a focus. And so I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on kind of the difference maybe between evolving and staying current and staying ahead of the trends, as opposed to trying, getting outside the sandbox, so to speak. Because I know that, with someone with experience, as vast and kind of dynamic as you have, you may have some thoughts on kind of how to play that side.
Yeah, no, look, I think it goes back to the old Russian proverb, right? It's you chase two rabbits, you end up with none. And I think you see that a lot with companies that, might be doing something or one thing very, very well, and then they decide to go and diversify into something else. But I think going back to evolve or die, I wasn't necessarily saying, hey, you need to start 10 different business lines, even though you're best at one. I'm talking about becoming more efficient and scalable in whatever it is that you are the best at, or you have a passion for. If the markets are emerging and you see other opportunities and you're already in line and you're already set up and your infrastructure is there and your talent pool of resources in-house, or at least reachable are there, and you can quickly turn on that business unit, then go for it. But I wouldn't dump all your eggs in that basket, right? I think you start with what you know. You rinse and repeat what's worked, which, if you have strategy and process, right, which a lot of these, I feel like a lot of teams forget or just aren't doing very well, you should be able to rinse and repeat a lot of those moving over to a new line of business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
Absolutely.
I think that's a good clarification. So let's talk about Apex. Let's circle back around there for a few minutes. Refresh everyone, who you guys are, what you guys do. You talked about a couple different industries, maybe at a high level, where you touch those industries at, and then we'll kind of dig in there a little bit more.
Yeah. So Apex kind of powered just about all of my ventures, which is really, how can we get more with less, right? How can we get more clients with less time spent? How can we get more revenue without taking on more staff or more risk, right? It's always every business has this, I want more with less X, right? And so Apex is essentially it's a managed service company and consultancy that helps established businesses kind of grow their marketing and sales and acquisitions to the highest points possible through strategy, process, and technology. What does that mean? It means, look, there's a cheaper, faster, better way to do a lot of the things that you're doing, especially whenever it comes to top of the funnel and mid funnel lead gen and growth initiatives, right? There's an intersection kind of taking place between sales and marketing, and we'll call that revenue or growth. And a lot of that can be managed through technology and these systems that are rolling out almost on an hourly basis at this point. But there still needs to be human capital, human intelligence kind of driving a lot of those. And a lot of teams just aren't equipped to do that. And that's really what Apex brings to the table. I've personally gone through the pains of banging my head up against the wall late nights trying to figure out how I'm going to bring in more deal flow, how I'm going to convert that deal flow, how I'm going to convert the people who don't convert after the first call, how I'm going to do all of this, how I'm going to get more data, how can I get in touch with everybody in the world by a click of a button, how can I, it's all of these things that keep guys like us up every night. And, I started working with some really, really talented marketers and guys, women and men that were kind of transforming the digital landscape. So we wrapped up Apex Strategy not too long ago, formalized it. There's myself, Matt Patoli, and Grant Cooper. You can look them up. They are experienced, successful entrepreneurs, marketers. They have successful exits and also other successful ventures, building out robust kind of platforms and cultures, niche cultures, all using that philosophy and that strategy to grow fast.
So one of the things you used the word marketing a few times. I want, from your vantage point, tell me how you think marketing and sales, how they go together, who serves who, what should each be gleaning from each other, because I think that's a fascinating discussion that kind of gets lumped together and probably not teased out enough.
Yeah. So to me, you can't really have a conversation about sales without marketing, or marketing without sales, right? I mean, everything that marketing does is for sales, and sales is, if sales needs to work very closely with marketing, take that baton and bring home the gold, to convert. So I think of everything kind of in a funnel. I think of marketing as far as, the promotion of, or the pull of, prospective clients, lead gen, et cetera, into the top of the funnel. And then throughout, the drop in that funnel, how is marketing kind of nurturing leads, or nurturing the conversations, building these relationships in a way that makes it very easy for sales to kind of pick up the baton, pick up the reins, take that conversation over, convert, or add value to, and close the deal. Whether that's acquisitions or sales, whether it's a widget or, oil and gas property for $10 million. I think it's all very similar in that you got to bring in the conversations, right? I'm a numbers guy, so the more numbers you throw into the top of the funnel, the better your results are going to be at the bottom of it. And what happens within that funnel, the two worlds really do collide. Marketing is set up with funnels or systems that will qualify, sift, and sort, and bucket all of these audiences and wonderful people that are coming in because they see value in the marketing messages, and sales should be completely aligned with those messages and be able to go ahead and convey the value, and like I said, bring the close home.
Okay, and one follow up to that real quick is, if you take that, Ben and I were talking about before you got on about different folks, and you have a big company and they're trying to sell to Bob in this department, and Sally is over here in this department, and so the sales guys out there trying to sell to Bob, but it's Bob and Sally, and Bob and Sally have different points of entry that they're trying to, or different reasons for making decisions. So we hear this complaint a lot from a marketing standpoint. How can marketing come in and service sales to where the message can be distributed differently, but the right message can get to the right person? Or would you say that maybe marketing is more to help glean that information so that the salespeople can understand that the messaging needs to change on the ground level?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and it's one that I think a lot of groups battle with. I think that you need to be specific to who you're going, whoever's the marketing side of the business needs to be as specific as possible. They need to understand who they're going after, understanding that there's more than one decision maker. The initial marketing message, however, needs to be targeted to one or the other, or vague enough to at least elicit some type of interest from the broader company perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Todd, I know that we're running out of time. I had one more question. I wanted to see if you can, I know that even as much as I feel like I have a finger on the pulse, and I'm consistently up to date on blockchain and data and those kind of markets that may scare some people away just because of just the vast amount of information that can be consumed. I was curious if you can kind of at a high level give us a picture on kind of how you. I think you have a really an interesting way, and a very effective way of intersecting data and data aggregation to actually deploy in a business strategy, as opposed to just, I feel like a lot of times, it's almost like there's all this data out there, but once I have the data, like, how do I actually turn that into, actionable stuff or takeaways that I can actually improve my business on? So what are some of the things that you're looking at when you're, trying to aggregate data, or kind of how do you approach that problem?
That's another loaded question. But here's how I think about data. I think about it from a sales, from an entrepreneur's standpoint, right? So I know that I need to make X number of dollars, and this is kind of something that was beat into me as a sales guy way back when, and I'm sure you guys do something similar. But data to me, in the world that I live in, it kind of looks like this. If I put X number of dollars into the top of the funnel, let's go back to the funnel, right? Then I get X number of dollars out of the funnel. So if I put X number of dollars into advertising and marketing and communication and purchasing data and promotion, how much is that going to yield me in revenue or income? You can back into those numbers as much as you want. The cool thing about technology and the data that we have through a lot of these mediums and platforms, whether it's social or search, is that you have demographics, you have the insight and the transparency into conversions that you typically wouldn't have, right? I know exactly how many people are engaging with my content. I know exactly how many people are clicking through to my content. I know exactly how many people are converting once they get into my funnel. And I can back my numbers into a very clear ROI on any type of money or resource spend that I put at the top of the funnel. It's predictable revenue, right? And with predictable revenue, then I can choose to keep it where it is, or continue to pump more dollars into the jukebox, right? And depending on the market, depending on the ceilings that are in place in those type of markets or different industries, you should see a corresponding lift in revenue.
Okay. Ben and I had to slap ourselves on the wrist. We talked about respecting people's time, and we are 4 minutes past our time with you. So we do apologize for that. We do thank you for being gracious with your time, though. And tell people where they can connect with you if they want to hear more about what you guys have going on.
Absolutely. ApexStrategyCo.com is under construction, but please check us out. Keep visiting. We should be live here in the next week or so. You can always find me on LinkedIn, as well as Matt Patoli or Grant Cooper, for any type of growth or revenue scaling projects that you may have. And then, of course, we have Relic Energy Management in the App Basin for any of your land and mineral needs.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. It was good to talk to you again, and best of luck to you, sir, in the future. And I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point to kind of talk about where you guys are at, 6-8 months on the road.
Appreciate it, Todd.
Love the show, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks. And once again, that was Todd Schweber with Apex Strategy. We went 5 minutes over there, Ben, with him. I think there's one person we can all agree to blame, right?
I mean, the only possible option here is option A, which is Nate.
A Nate. Yeah, that's.
There is no option B, C, or D. It's the easiest question on the test. I mean,
you never blame the guest. So that goes away. Me and you are professional podcast hosts with multiple hundreds and hundreds of episodes experience under our belt. So it can't be us. So it has to be. I mean, we could blame the internet connection, but the internet didn't cut out for me. Did it cut out for you?
No, sir.
Okay, no, so it's not the internet. Okay, so yeah, it just leaves Nate. Okay, yeah, good point. A is Nate.
By process of elimination, the Venn diagram says Nate.
Nate. Yeah. Well, Ben, it was good to get back on here. We will be off again next week because I will be in China going to close phase 1 and probably phase 2 of the U.S.-China trade deal, because what else am I going to do while I'm over there? Ben, what will you be doing while I am curing international problems?
First of all, I wouldn't say that too loud, or the POTUS might subtweet you and put you on the case, like for
Hey,
real.
hey,
He might send you over to G. I
well,
mean,
I'll
you
get it.
better be careful.
Hold on. We didn't even talk about the fact that I am now a formally recognized international policy expert. We haven't even talked about that on the show, but we will. I'm sure I will
I'm
gloat
actually
about that.
surprised. I'm surprised you didn't superimpose the picture or the plaque over your face for the podcast. I mean, I figured all I was going to see on your screen was just the plaque that just said whatever hackathon master or whatever it was. I mean, again, I think we talked about it on the last podcast, but we probably shouldn't dive too deeply into you, instrumental in winning a Chinese U.S. hackathon. We probably shouldn't talk about that. But
Yeah, the hackathon was an interesting choice of words there. I get what they mean, but I've had a lot of people like, "What are you doing with China and hacking again?" It's like, well, no, it's not that kind of hacking, not publicly at least. But no, it's not that kind of hacking. So it was an interesting choice of words for the implications between those U.S.-China relations there. But yeah, what to break it down. I tell you what, next time I'll let you interview me on how to be a foreign policy expert. That should be the next show. Are you going to be working the next couple of weeks, or what are you going to do? Like, you usually shut down October. You've worked well past your normal time for this year. So will you be working November, December, or when do you come back from your hiatus?
I mean, it depends. It depends on how you qualify work. I mean, some people might qualify that I don't work a day out of the year at all. I mean, it kind of all depends on what you mean by work.
I was being generous.
I appreciate that. I can never tell with you. No, I'm closing a pretty big acquisition either Friday of this week or Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, depending on how quickly we can get to the table on some things. And then got a couple other things in the works. But I mean, as you know, the Q4 is generally pretty slow. And in this market, I'm not expecting there to be anything gangbusters, but just looking forward to budgeting for 2020.
Right. So your Q4 is slow. Mine is solving international trade deals and traveling the world. Yeah, Q4 is terribly slow. You're right. It's so slow. Yeah. What would I do with all this free time? It must be nice to work like half years. So anyways, for Ben Samuels, this is Ryan Ray saying we will talk to you in 2 weeks.